Hello and welcome back. This is the second video of the series of the Tales of the Calamity that I'm gonna be reading here on the channel. You can find the first one already on the channel or in this playlist wherever you are. Today we're gonna be reading Tales from the Calamity, the Sultana 7. And initially I have to say I wasn't as attached to Sultana as a character. It's just I never established that kind of connection with her. But over time, she became like I don't know, at least through Realm Reborn, one of my most beloved characters, and I'm very curious to read this and get a little bit of a backstory on her Calamity. By the way, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to know where to come back. I cover all things Final Fantasy XIV, and if you want to continue listening to these awesome stories, this is how you know where to come back. Anyways, we're gonna start. Tales from the Calamity, the Sultana 7. Nanamo watched from her private terrace as the immortal flames fled out of Ul'dah. The host left the city via the Gate of Thal, an egress symbolizing passage into the afterlife, in hopes of cheating death upon the battlefield. Crowds had gathered for the occasion, their boisterous cheers resounding through the Sultanate, but Nanamo did not hear them. She stood transfixed before the balustrade as Roban put his spurs to his corsair, and there she remained long after the dust had settled in the rear guard's wake. She had steeled herself for this moment, but when it firmly came, she found that her courage had deserted her all the same. Suddenly, the reality of her isolation was only too plain, and the mere thought of it made her struggle for breath. I am alone. May the gods grant me strength. Honestly, I really wanna learn a little bit more about her, and I know that there's probably info about this on Wikipedia, but I don't know how old Nanamo was at this point of time. I don't know. Like it could be that she was pretty young, but I'm going to have to check and see. She was definitely having a hard time. As the days went by, the weight of responsibility and uncertainty began to tell. Nanamo's nights were sleepless. Not even her favorite dishes would pass her lips, and her round, lalafulin cheeks took on a hollow cast. Sure enough, despite the best ministrations of her ladies in waiting, her health began to fail. She became a ghost of herself, and her duties went untended. Whenever difficulty presented itself, she would invariably think, if only Raban were here, cursing her own weakness, even as the thought took shape. She knew very well that, as Flame General, Raban's place was with the host at the Cartanu Flats. It was his duty to lead his men into battle against the 7th Imperial Legion. I shall soon be 6 and 10 summers old. I cannot rely upon others forever. Sooner or later, I must stand on my own 2 feet. I only hope I have the strength. So she was about to be 16, and even though that's pretty young, I guess the time that we're currently talking about, it's she was probably old enough to to lead and make decisions and whatnot based on just how things used to be in our like IRL history. Very young people would lead armies, would get married and such, so she wasn't that young now that we think about it from that point of view. But 16 is definitely young to be dealing with a calamity. Another meal came and went untouched. Taking her leave of the dining hall, Nanamo glanced apologetically at the silent shadow that was Pippin Tarapin, adoptive son of Roban, and officer of the Immortal Flames. The earnest young soldier remained at her side at his father's behest, entrusted with her care in the Flame General's absence. Pippin would never admit it, dutiful as he was, but Nanamo knew that he would sooner be fighting beside his comrades at Carcano. She could not help but feel responsible for denying him his wish, and for what? Though Pippin was his father's son, it was plain to both of them that it was the father that she needed. And so the days dragged on, each fading into the next, until the hour of reckoning came at last. Like, actually, you find out so early that he's his adoptive son. We only found out like in game. For those of us who haven't read the side stories, I think we found out in Stormblood that he was his son. And it's actually wild to me that these stories were published such a very long time ago, and pretty much everyone who read them knew this backstory. And when they saw Ruban in game, they instantly like knew that he had a son and whatnot. I'm pretty sure it was Stormblood. Like, I don't remember this information being disclosed earlier, but I could be wrong. I'm gonna have to check that. Word from Mordona, Your Grace. The battle is joined. Nanamo was in the Fragnant Chambers, holding private audience with Tancred of the Circle of Knowing when Pippin burst in with the tidings. A weak, I see, was all she could manage in response. While Pippin strove to hide his disappointment at this tepid utterance, Tancred was quick to make his feelings known. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but I had hoped for something a little bit more rousing. Since agreeing to serve as an advisor to the Sultanate, the self-proclaimed bard had made himself bard? What? Bard had made himself at home at court, becoming ever more irreverent in the process. When last I looked, your people had need of you. I had no idea he was a bard? That's wild. What could a powerless puppet like me possibly do? Nanamo snapped back, immediately regretted her petulance. The bard was not discouraged, however, and responded with uncharacteristic force. You are not powerless, Your Grace. You can pray for Yorzia's salvation. Prayer, she thought. Has it really come to that? But of course he'd add. Even as they spoke, Dalamud drew closer. According to Archon Louisois, only by the power of the 12 could the lesser moon be returned to the heavens and the coming of the seventh umbral era forestalled. And only by the prayers of the faithful could that power be summoned forth. It was to allow the summoning ritual to proceed unhindered that the soldiers of the Yorzian alliance, Ruban among them, now fought at Cartenon. Tancred went on, his voice taking on a gentler tone. If you pray, so too will the people, and the combined strength of their faith shall bear their plea for Yorzia's salvation unto the heavens. A moment passed in silence. If praying is all that I can do, then I will do it with all my heart. Composing herself once more, she nodded, rose from her seat, and turned her step towards Arzenet Ossuary. Upon arriving at the temple, Pippin helped Nanamo to her knees and stood guard as she prayed. On the far side of the city, at Milvanet's sacrarium, Tancred was doing the very same, she knew. O gods of my forefathers, deliver us from destruction. O gods of my forefathers, bring Ruban safely back to me. A few hours into her vigil, chaos erupted. The ossuary shook violently, as if struck by a giant's fist, prompting Pippin to draw close as masonry fell about them. Terrified screams filled her ears, but Nanamo did not give in to panic. In defiance of the tumult around her, she prayed with all her being. Her determination was soon rewarded. The stone plinth bearing the mark of the Dusk Trader began to glow. Moments later, a pillar of light burst forth from its surface, enveloping the image of Thal that stood upon it and illuminating every corner of the hall. In that instant, Nanamo felt the presence of the divine. Even as she basked in the sensation, a familiar voice echoed in her mind. Let Eorzea be born anew, it said. Luswa, she thought, and knew no more. Nanamo awakened to find herself lying prone on the ossuary's smooth stone floor. Footfalls rang out all about her. From the corner of her eye, she saw Pippin rise to one knee, seemingly struggling to shake off the selfsame torpor which gripped her. For a time she remained still, content to gaze up at the stone plinth. Its divine light had faded, she noted dimly. A shrill yell brought her back from her reverie. Riders of Sapphire Avenue! They're headed this way. Consternation swept over Pippin's face. Your Grace, we cannot linger. Let us return to the palace at once. I will not hide while my people suffer. The answer rose to her lips unbidden, with a swiftness that surprised even her. Rising to her feet, she surveyed her surroundings. Robed figures were scrambling hither and thither, bearing precious tomes and artifacts away, presumably to safety. they weren't stealing, right? Not at all. At the heart of the bustle, a small yet commanding figure was barking out orders. Nanamo recognized him as Mumuepo, High Priest of the Order of Nal's Thal and Master of the Thaumaturgist Guild. Oh wow, this is such a cool backstory. The riders cannot be allowed to defile the ossuary. The the man fairly screamed. Incinerate any foolish enough to come near. These words set Nanamo's blood to roiling. And you call yourself a man of the cloth. Checking her fury, she addressed all present. Our citizens are in the grip of fear. They but want the voice of reason to restore them to their senses. Who among you will aid me? Pippin stepped forward as Nanamo knew he would. Though I am but a poor substitute for my father, I live only to serve you, my Sultan. Pray command me as you see fit. Next came Papashan of the Sultan's Sword, followed by 5 thaumaturges of the guild, Lalafels all, and brothers besides. No more answered the Sultana's call, however. Only 7, she lamented as she took stock of her volunteers. But they will suffice, they must. With gritted teeth, Nanamo stepped out onto the stricken streets of Ul'dah. Of their own accord, her hastily assembled escort formed a protective ring around her, and together they trudged through the smoke and rubble. No matter where she looked, her eyes were met with scenes of carnage. A girl cried over the charred body of her mother. Oh my god. A man lay moaning, his legs crushed beneath tons of stone. Their plight wrenched her heart, but she could not stop for them. First she had to quell the unrest, else there would be no lasting relief. I will return for you all. This I promise. As Nanamo's band reached Emerald Avenue, the mob of rioters came into view. Shops and homes had been ransacked in its wake, the occupants fleeing for their lives. Undaunted, Nanamo forged onward to within earshot of the advancing rabble, where she stopped, took a deep breath, and set about her task. Papashan, I must have their attention. Nodding, the elderly paladin produced a blinding flash that staggered some of the rioters. Many, however, continued their rampage oblivious. Thaumaturgus, light up the sky! In unison, the 5 Lalafilin brothers let loose a warning barrage of dispels overhead. Actually, I never did my Black Mage quest, as I don't have it fully leveled yet. But I recently did the post Moogle quest line, and within one of those quests, you get a little bit of a backstory on their guild and on the brothers. I thought that was really cool. So I kind of known them from that quest line. But I guess when I level my Black Mage, I'll get to know them more. All right, let's go. Most impressive among these was the conflagration unleashed by the brother with the bandaged face. Those rioters who failed to take notice before did so now. Satisfied, Nanamo turned to Pippin. Lend me your back. With a booming voice that bellied her sighs, Nanamo addressed the rabble. Heed me, my beloved citizens, she began. The realm lies upon the brink of the 7th Umbral era. Yet so long as we live, we must not forget our compassion. Now is not the time to take from your neighbor, but to proffer him the hand of succor. The brave men and women of the immortal flames risked their lives that we might go on with ours. Would you have them return to Ul'dah that has torn itself apart? Looks of shame manifested upon the grim faces. I ask that you be strong, given not to fear and despair. If we join hands in common cause, there is no hardship that we cannot overcome. Together, let us tend the wounds of our nation, our shared home. Like, I can't stop but imagining Nanamo just kind of standing on Pippin's back. It's like something that a fellow Lalafell is never supposed to do for you, but here we are. Hearing these heartfelt words from their Sultana, the madness began to melt from the rioters' eyes to be replaced by the gleam of reason. Soon after, a semblance of order returned to the city, and organized relief efforts commenced in earnest. Some days later, the remnants of the Immortal Flames trudged back into Ul'dah, entering the city by way of the Gate of Nald. Wounded and weary though the soldiers were, they yet had homes to which they might return. In midst of rebuilding, Nanamo issued a decree stripping Mumuepo of all official titles and accompanying privileges. Though such an act would ordinarily have been beyond her authority, it was made possible owing to clever maneuvering on Pippin's part. Evidence of rampant corruption was found, with the high priest in its midst, and his order had no choice but to abide by the Sultana's will. In place of the incarcerated Mumuepo, the 5 Lalafilin brothers were made joint masters of the Thaumaturgus Guild. Oh my god! I finally understand that quest from the post-Moogle store. story. Basically, what they're talking about is a person from the guild who still has a lot of loyalty and just the overall, well, yeah, loyalty, I guess, and fondness for the like the ex leader of the guild. And we knew that Mumuepo was like incarcerated and whatnot, but like I never knew why. I never knew when it happened, and I never actually got to learn the full story. This is so satisfying. In the months and years that followed, Nanamo often revisited the events of that fateful day. I am not powerless, she would remind herself. There are things that even a puppet might achieve. If she could do her duty as Sultana in the midst of the calamity, she could surely carry out the task to come. I love this story. It's actually so empowering, and we can like sense the hints of Nanamo just having this newfound strength, but we don't really know where it's coming from and what actually happened during the calamity. Not unless we read the story, of course. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Next time I will be reading the what is it? The of Friends Lost and Found, and this is probably going to be the stories of like all of the leaders, and later on we're gonna get to hear Louis Va's story. And yeah, thank you for enjoying this with me. Again, if you haven't subbed to the channel yet, make sure to do so you know where to come back and catch another story, or take a look at my other videos, highlights, guides, and whatnot. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Have a great day, and bye bye.